It always gives us a warning, so we both know that we're recording in progress. I really like your show, by the way. I've been listening.
Life's in progress, and I love your show. I mean, you
Thanks.
like my show. I love your show. Not to give you a guilt trip or anything.
You one-upped me again.
I'm gonna. Yeah, I one upped you 5 minutes ago with the. Yeah, I'm on fire today. But I wanted to. I think that our conversation is so powerful, and the last conversation we had a couple months ago was really powerful because you and I are two. I'm going to speak for both of us. Okay, we're two really smart, really curious, neurodiverse folks. Mm-hmm. Our brains just work differently.
I'm with you.
We can look at it as something wrong because the mental health industry points to disorder treatment, focusing on what's wrong with the side effects of a very brilliant, sensitive, neurodiverse brain.
Pathology based, right? Sometimes, yeah.
And pathology is where the our growing edge is, if you know what I mean, because nothing good comes out of unless we make it good.
Yeah.
Because it's never the psychologist, the therapist, the psychiatrist, the mental health professional that's doing anything for you. It's all on you all the time. Never, ever, ever. Well, someone can say, well, and this is my opinion, and ladies and gentlemen, don't listen to my words, search for your own wisdom. But since I'm on here, I got to speak. Go ahead.
That's what I like. I like the way you approach that, by the way, because there's not enough people who start with that. A lot of people will say that under duress, maybe like, well, I don't know everything, but you like to throw it out there right in the beginning. I like that.
For better, for worse.
Well, it's also a subtle bid for credibility too, which not I don't mean that in a
I've been there.
Unique way, but it's I'm with you too. In fact, it's interesting because when they actually research on treatment, what does help is if you don't have some kind of a rapport and a relationship with the provider, it doesn't work at all, no matter what they do. And that's the thing. When they try to say what works, it's like,
right.
Well, relationship and support seems to work pretty well. And if without that, nothing works at all.
Totally. And I'm with you. And I love what you said there, because there has to be that connection. But I'm going to take that a step farther and say, this is controversial.
Yeah.
Therapy is a catharsis, but it doesn't point us back to our well-being. It doesn't point us back to who and what we are, which is well-being, which is mental health, which is love, which is seeing that our foundation is hope, because everything starts from, and again, people can say, oh, that's not that simple. It's more complicated. And it's the reason why people say that is because our brain complicates everything. Of course, because when you look at this mental health from try to intellectualize it like clinicians do, you get 100% nowhere, because all it is, it becomes one big argument and what's wrong with you. Because what does a brain like to do? A brain likes to criticize and compartmentalize and put things into boxes and critique and compare. What that doesn't get you to mental health, that gets you to more critical analysis and research and study about a brain that creates problems and solves them all at the same time, innocently. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when we're talking about well-being, we forget that it's already there within us. We're just not paying attention to those subtle kind of glimpses of that quiet calm that you and I spoke about, of that feel-good feeling for no reason.
Yeah.
Of that inner resilience that we all have. And it is that simple, but our brain loves to complicate stuff. So
I wonder, it was when I had reached out to you and we were rescheduling this conversation, I think the thing I said was to focus a little bit on why you don't like the term techniques or the concept. Really, to be completely honest, I was just kind of saying, let's pave the way for, Sam Part 2 on the show, just to have you on again and have the conversation go, which I knew it would. But that was something that I thought was very interesting. Both,
and it's a great question.
When we were talking on your show, you were on the Rise Today podcast that I produce with Erica,
and you do an amazing
Harris.
job on it, because
well, thank you.
I re-listened to ladies and gentlemen, he didn't send me a Venmo to plug his production abilities as a producer, but it's really, really, the production quality is really good. And I was, on the YouTube video and also on the podcast. So,
thanks.
Good job.
Yeah, it's great. And Dr. Harris, Erica Harris, is the host of that, and she makes it a lot of fun to be a part of. But anyway, so yeah, that's something that you said that I think is super powerful and in a really intriguing way. And I bet you probably find different reactions to that when you say like, "Oh, I don't believe in techniques."
No, not reactions, arguments.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess that's a reaction. And when someone argues with me about it, I know that they're not really listening.
What technique?
They're listening,
do you take
but
to
they're
argue?
not.
No, just
But
kidding.
they're listening, but they're not listening because they're thinking from their intellect. They're not thinking from their present moment right here. They're up in their heads trying to respond to what I'm saying versus actually take it in and see it from not from the intellect, but from who they are, from being present with me, seeing what I'm pointing to. The brain can't figure that out because again, the brain, and I'm going to get to the technique part, but as a side,
Of course, yeah.
because this will help this will help it kind of get to what you're asking me is why I don't think techniques long-term work or worth its salt at all long-term. I don't care if you have bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, and I have anxiety. I mean, I'm, my engine runs a little higher, the throttle is a little elevated for me. My engine runs a little hotter than most people. So stop it. But you can reserve all the comments in the comments in the podcast
comment section. Tweet them at no, but I'm with you too. I definitely have that anxiety bit. I can't remember what neurodivergent things we just talked about last time or whatever. But I know we
didn't talk enough about it.
ADHD, bipolar diagnosis. I've scored positive in those areas.
I did. I got a gold star.
Yeah.
For scoring positive in those areas. They didn't give me a no gold watch, but so sorry. I'll be here all day. Tip your waiter and waitress.
Certain levels, the gold watch level, gold member.
I know, my friend, my partner in crime here, that I've done my job if I get you to laugh. Mm-hmm. If I can get the audience to laugh, because that's what I'm pointing to.
Yeah.
And half the time when I talk, but half the time when I'm talking with clients, we talk mumbo jumbo, absolutely about nothing about what's wrong with them or how terrible their week was. It's just about stuff. And they start getting really present and they start laughing. Mm-hmm. And then I can share and guide them, but they're no good in their head or worrying. So getting back to what we're talking about, is the question that you posed to me is why I don't think modalities and techniques are a long-term solution or have very little short-term efficacy. And I go back to the fact that we live in a thought-based universe, which means that our mind, our brain, is creating thought in real time, doesn't stop ever, because the brain loves you and wants to keep you safe. And we're dealing with some very old equipment that we are just innocently not using right, because we were conditioned to use it the wrong way. When I mean that is, and not in a like, there's something wrong with you, you're using it the wrong way, you need to go in for reprogramming. No, that's not what I'm saying, is that all human beings do, because the brain is such a used car salesman and convinces us that thought is real because we feel our thinking. Because obviously if we're feeling our thinking, and it must be real, but the brain has an operating system that hasn't had a software update since, Paleolithic era. We're talking caveman times. And because of that, it's a stimulus response system, right? So for ADHDers like me, I got the MVP award for being able to protect my family or the tribe, because I can multitask. Because it's always high stimulus. There's a saber-toothed tiger there. I need to kill it, right? I can go out and hunt, bring the food back. It was a very simple existence. We didn't live that long, but it was a simple existence. We either we defended the tribe, or we killed the animal that was chasing after us, or we ran away from the animal, fight or flight. So the brain is the system, the emergency alert system that's constantly being activated, has not evolved since caveman times. So now fast forward to 2021, I'm going to get to the point where I'm saying modalities don't work long term.
You're good. I'm enjoying. I like the journey of it all. But yeah, I love the jump forward.
Where's the soundtrack?
You're absolutely right.
I'll lay it. Jeopardy.
I'll lay it in later.
Yes.
Yeah, no.
How about Chariots of Fire?
I usually just rip off whatever This American Life puts under their interviews.
I love. Okay, we're getting off into a tangent, but I
Their
love
listeners are
Ira
used to
Glass. I love Ira. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Mind wandering is mind wandering is one of my favorite things to do.
I got
That's why
to
I love
see
writing.
him. I got to see him once live.
That's
It's
not
pretty
fair,
good.
man.
Yeah.
He is so nerdy and cool.
I
at
would
the
have
same
invited
time.
you, but I didn't have your number back then. So
Right, but now see, it all roads lead to Ira Glass. So, I love being on your show because it just flows. So, getting back to what I'm pointing to.
Yeah. Flashing forward to the 21st century. Yeah.
Flashing forward to the 21st century, we're still dealing with a emergency alert system that is extraordinarily old, that is a stimulus response. So the brain can't distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger, past due bills, having initial kind of like butterflies before you go on your first date, or you're going in front of an audience, in front of your colleagues and doing a presentation, right? In front of your boss, and the saber-toothed tiger, and anything in life that we create meaning around it is considered possibly a causing anxiety. So knowing that the brain can't differentiate between stuff. But the brilliant thing about the emergency alert system is that the brain has this self-correcting thought moving through system that we all know works, that clinicians know work, researchers know work, that works perfectly, despite we're dealing with a TRS-80 or a VIC-20, Commodore 64 of an emergency alert system. It's like, they were talking about the air traffic controllers, the systems that they use are so antiquated still. Right. It's much worse than that. So knowing that our brain hasn't evolved in thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of years, it still thinks we're walking around with spears and stuff.
And there's no accommodation for, like, the world has changed so much. Exactly. That we haven't even figured out our sleep cycles since the light bulb was invented. Right.
Exactly. So 2021 comes along, and we have social media, we have taxes, we have cars, we have smartphones, we have every kind of piece of technology that is a device of dopamine enhancement in some capacity, right? It's always Las Vegas in our worlds, the lights and the noise. So the brain doesn't know what to do with that innocently. It's stupid innocently. It's myopic innocently. So when you think about therapy and techniques, knowing that despite its inability to sort of pattern recognize between a ham sandwich that may have E. coli in it that might kill us, or a saber-toothed tiger that, if we're not careful, will definitely kill us. We don't run away, or we don't attack, kill it ourselves. That's actually liberating, because once we know that, we know not to take our anxiety seriously when we are scared that we're not going to be able to pay rent next week. Right. So getting curious about when we are caught up around the axle of anxiety, overwhelmed thinking, me having a neurodiverse sensitive mind, which there's nothing wrong with my mind. It is definitely nothing wrong with your mind. It's how it works. It's how the system works. I read somewhere, like ADHD wise, and this number could be wrong, because I think I read it's like we're looking at like there's 100 million folks out there that have ADHD. So if there's 100 million people, just say they have ADHD, right? Then there has to be, well, that means that their brains just work differently. It doesn't mean that the brains are working wrong. Doesn't mean just because the brain doesn't. So getting back to the techniques part, if there was one person that had ADHD on the planet, I'd say maybe there's something wrong with him. But 100 million folks that have brains that work, that have brains that work in similar fashion, that, they don't screen up dopamine, the prefrontal cortex is doing something. It's not wrong. It's just, it's how it works.
I have wondered, and I particularly wonder this about ADHD, And to also, autism is another one I wonder about. I wonder in a
Same thing.
generation or two, like if our grandkids are going to go, can you believe they used to think that was a disorder? They used to
Right.
call, and then they'll have some name that's not ADHD. They'll have some name that's like, nonlinear thinking or something. And they'll say, they used to
Exactly.
think that was a disorder. What a bunch of weird cavemen our grandparents were. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Just like they thought, just like they said, and again, these are weird comparisons, but if you look at transgender people, that was in the DS, that was considered a mental illness,
Yeah.
which is so
The
disgusting.
DSM-3, and we're only on 5 now.
It's so effed up. It's so horrible so people in white lab coats don't know. They're good for some things. They're good for helping with pandemics and getting vaccines out, but they still don't know a lot, and they think they do because they've been conditioned through society to believe that, oh, here's the God complex of a guy in a white lab coat. He must know something that I don't know. And then they know a lot of stuff, but they're not right a lot of the time. So getting back to the techniques and modalities. So we have an operating system that's really old. It can't distinguish the difference. It can't distinguish between a saber-tooth tiger and not having enough money for food. And then we have this self-correcting operating system, just like on your computer. If you have Windows and it freezes up, you either you Control-Delete and reboot the system, or the Microsoft upgrades a software patch. But the brain does the same thing 100% of the time. We're just not paying attention because the noise is so loud between our ears. So we think it's so real that we're pointing more to the noise and less to that quiet calm that you and I spoke about. So it does correct itself on its own, and new fresh thinking moves through 100% of the time, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. Knowing that thought has to move through you despite how uncomfortable it is. Look, I was having anxiety here today. I got lost. I thought I was going to be late to our podcast. I'm on the freeway and there's like this construction, and like my brain's going like, Dwight's going to kill me. Dwight's going to kill me. And I'm going to be late. And this is how I'm going to, my day is going to go. And then what else is going to happen that's going to mess with my day? Brain's doing this feature fantasy dance, thinks our brain are not fortune tellers, but the brain predicts stuff innocently because
and interestingly, we often give credence to anxiety will fill up silence. So if I don't know something's going to happen, my anxiety will take the time to say, oh, it's going to be bad. And we always give more credence to the bad predictions than if I was to say, hey, it'll probably work out, and be like, oh yeah, you're not being realistic. It's like, well, why is realism always today's going to be terrible? Because Dwight's a notorious hard ass when it comes to being on time.
And exactly. So knowing that kind of thinking, even though it feels real, because we all take the bait sometimes, we all forget, and then we remember again. By just getting really curious, like how ridiculous a brain can work to be a fortune teller and predict the future, or create some story and meaning around nonsense. Like we literally think like that. The brain literally thinks that thought can keep us safe, which we know is a complete fallacy. It's wrong. It doesn't make any sense. But it just being, part of our human experience is to learn stuff and to experience, literally, experientially experience life. And we're supposed to forget sometimes. There's no lesson. It just happens. It's just the juicy parts of the good and bad and the up and down of life.
Well, the saber-toothed tiger has the one advantage of being confronted by a saber-toothed tiger is that it's there and you can react to it. And then when it's gone, it's gone. Whereas if it's my boss is kind of mad at me, maybe I think, and that might cost me down the road, there's nothing there to fight. There's nothing there to run away from. Because even a strategy like, well, I could change jobs. I mean, that's not fight or flight. Fight or flight isn't. That's an immediate.
Right, but it feels that way
feeling.
sometimes.
It's like, well, I got to get out of here. Yeah.
Right, but the anxiety feels that way. So so getting back to the fact
same feeling, but there's no anything to fight or run from.
There's no there.
Yeah. The saber-toothed tiger, at least if you escape from the saber-toothed tiger, your system goes, oh, flush out that adrenaline. It's gone now, whereas my boss is still there, kind of.
And again, there's nothing. See, this is the thing. we're conditioned to believe that we should be scared of our experience of anxiety. We're conditioned to believe that we need to be scared of scary thinking. Why are we so scared of that? So here's what I get back to the thing about modalities and techniques. So knowing that we have a self-correcting system that works 100% of the time, if we allow it to, like when I was flying to visit family back east a couple months, like 3 months ago, we hit a patch of turbulence. And most people don't love turbulence. It's a little unsettling, but I'm extra anxious. So my brain already went to, oh, here we go again. We may not make it, even though the turbulence never brought a plane down statistically, and that the pilot knows it's just uncomfortable. It's just the plane can tolerate a lot more than just turbulence, and it's not going to happen. But the brain will do those mental gymnastics anyways. But just like turbulence, and we talked about in the last conversation we had a couple months ago, turbulence is transitory, right? Some turbulence is worse than others, just like some anxiety is worse than others, but it always moves through us. And then we find a calmer thought altitude, just like a cruising altitude. It's the same thing, but just knowing that you have to allow thought to move through you. It's the healthiest thing to do. And it will always move through you like an energy source. Just knowing that, even when we're caught up in it and it feels real, and sometimes we forget that that's what's happening, is liberating, is peace of mind. That what's really true is that we have this inner intelligence underneath the noise of anxiety that's guiding us along this river of life. If we pay attention to it, it's that quiet calm, it's that quiet voice. It's just that knowing, right?
It's riding through the turbulence, which is a perfect real metaphor for your philosophy too. And it's one of the things I actually found myself kind of quoting you the other day, except I didn't tell anybody. I just pretended I thought of it.
But you'll have to speak to my lawyer.
Is that why he's trying to join the call? I keep seeing this thing pop up. It just says Sam's lawyer. Dang it. I knew this was a setup. But no, I was saying the other day, just someone, and it took me a minute to even remember. I was just like, here's his wisdom and Simon, where'd it come from? Oh, Sam. Yeah. No, we were just talking. I was like, yeah, but in about 15 minutes, you'll feel better when you feel that way. And I was like, oh yeah, Sam says that all the time. In a little bit, you'll feel better. You just you got to ride through it. Yeah.
And remember that it's just thought, even though that doesn't help people, and that we have agency over what we want to, what thought we want to give life to. Mm-hmm. Thought's just thought unless we create meaning around it. The brain does its darndest to create meaning around stuff. It's the constant chatty Cathy, the jibber jabber, that makes us believe that if we don't do this, this is going to happen. How do we know that? Right? It's like, and then when it does happen, see my assumption was, my brain, Nostradamus prediction was right. That's baloney. Come on. So there's intuition.
Take that, Nostradamus. You're going down.
Yeah. You're going down and then some. So think about the fact that like, intuition is a clear and calm signal, right? So knowing we have all this wonderful self-leveling, self-correcting system on board, okay, that kind of makes up for the fact that we have a reptilian brain that is ridiculously old. It should be on Medicare times 1,000 and then some, because it's so darn old. Is a blessing and very liberating, and it's also gets us in trouble sometimes innocently. But when it gets us in trouble and we forget, that's the time when we need to have compassion for ourselves. As hard as that sounds for people rolling their eyes listening to what I just said, and self-compassion can manifest itself in so many different ways.
So
right,
yeah.
So getting back to techniques, so knowing that we have a self-leveling system. Know that the system thought settles on its own, and new fresh thinking will come through if you just sit with it. Okay. Like me today driving, and literally I'm getting really anxious and stuck in traffic. And then my brain's going off into the ethers, future fantasy, thinking about how I'm going to mess up the rest of my day. And this is just another example of how ridiculously incompetent you are as a human being. I mean, okay, you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, exactly.
So techniques and modalities layer the system. They may offer short-term relief, But just like CBT, which has its, and again, ladies and gentlemen, search this out for yourself. Don't listen to my words. Find your own wisdom. If I'm not trying to like convince you that this is the truth. This is my truth. And it seems to me and a lot of other people out there that that's the real truth, the truth, a spiritual truth. That if you layer the system with modalities, you're overcomplicating something that doesn't need to be complicated. The system works perfectly. You're trying to change thought. You're trying to replace one thought with another thought. That's a lot of work. It's pulling all these levers and creating more containers to put that thought in and change that thought and put the thought in another container, and then being aware of your thoughts. And I'm just listening to me talk about this is making me exhausted versus sitting with it. What's going to happen to you?
How much of it?
You're going to self-combust? I mean, listen, I'm the most anxious person in the world. It sucks. And sometimes it's really, really uncomfortable. And sometimes I may have a panic attack. But I can also have a panic attack and then 15 minutes later, 10 minutes later, be okay with it. Like, what am I so embarrassed about? Like, what? I'm the only human that has panic attacks? What do you think? Your boss doesn't get anxious? They're going to fire you because no, that's not how it works. We're all human beings. Like, and if they do fire you, if you're in your office having a panic attack, then that's not the tribe you want to work for.
Yeah. So there's a couple of thoughts I'm having as you're saying. One of them is the importance of classification, as you put it. What thoughts, or thoughts by themselves, experiences by themselves even, don't really mean anything until we create a structure around it. So the classification
story.
The mythology is what like Solomon Minuchin or somebody would call it, like the family mythology when he would do family therapy or whatever, or the story, the narrative. A lot of times is a term you hear people say. And do I find evidence of that narrative based off of my anxiety? Well, yeah, but does that mean that it's true? Well, no.
It's 100% false.
Right.
It's 100% made up in real time by the greatest soap opera writer in the history of time. It's called The Brain. And that's why we've had the Guiding Light's been on for 50 years.
And how much of it? You go ahead.
No, how much? Something's good's coming.
I just was going to say, as far as the waiting for it, the sifting through how much of this boils down to having that trust that if I go through the turbulence, that I'll still be flying. How much of it is the trust that something will come through, right?
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing that kind of is the game changer. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate to break it to you. You don't have control over anything, nothing. But the universe has got you. Life has got you because you are so much bigger than your freaking personal, small little puny personal mind. It's a machine. It's a computer. And knowing that it's going to glitch, just like your laptop, that it's got a piece of equipment on that's extraordinarily old. And on top of it, you can also see that sometimes very innocently, the mind gets in the way of that intelligence that's underneath the noise that we do see all day long. We just don't pay attention to it enough. And that's when I say when we first started talking a couple months ago, when I said to you, and I quoted Sydney Banks, is that we're just one thought away from mental health. That's essentially true. Like, I'm not ADHD all the time, right? I'm not anxious all the time, because it's just thought. And any clinician would argue with me with that thought, because, and anyone that does, it's not because I'm trying to be right. It's not my ego saying that. It's because it's the truth. But again, it's too simplistic. Just like why modalities don't work long term. It's too simplistic. Well, there's more to it than that. I've had anxiety for 40 years. It's not like just putting a campfire out. I mean, I have all this, time racked, these miles racked, these freaking flyer miles racked up, going to my therapist and charging it on my aviator card. I mean, but it's true. Like, because we have a story around that too. We have a story around, but we have a story around the story about our therapy with our
the investment. Like, we're invested in the problem because I put so much into it. Like, I
have so much investment in it. I'm like, it's like the stock market. I'm like, oh my God, dude. Get over yourself. Really, like, do you want to continue to suffer, or do you want to see what the great sages have pointed to? Some of the greatest thought leaders and teachers in both, the spiritual world and the religious world and the academic world have pointed to this. Scientists know that there's something beyond our thinking, that there's this inner intelligence. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I mean, you can call it intuition, you can call it inner guidance, you can call it, I don't know, pick your favorite spiritual, jargon for it. And once we see that if we layer the system with modalities and techniques that just overcomplicate stuff, eventually you return back to thought. You're not going to dismiss anxiety. It's not going to go away. And if you try to use it to create new neural patterns and all the neuroplastic, all that stuff with the neuroplasticity of the brain, that's going to be a lot of work for very limited, in my opinion. Again,
the big difference then between something being a technique and not being a technique, would that just be the I'm totally blanked there for a second.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, there we go. There's my thought process going through, and then it just went off.
But that's good. It's good. It happens to me all the time, so don't feel bad.
No, it does me too.
Air,
but yeah,
White Earth.
Just on the thing.
Part 2.
Don't worry. We all.
It's turning into like a new age podcast. It's like, listen to the dead air.
Everybody
to the sound of nothing.
Just zone out for a moment. That'd be interesting.
But that's interesting because it is about nothingness.
I'm like searching for it, right? I'm like, what's the difference between technique and what would you call it? Just thought, just allowing it to happen. Techniques you would say would muddy the waters, but of course you approach it, and maybe an approach or a philosophy is a better way to say.
Listen, if it works for you, ladies and gentlemen, if your techniques work for you, then go with God. Seriously, I'm not trying to change hearts and minds regarding this. But what I do know is that I want everyone listening to have a better, more peaceful, kinder, and gentler life, and more of a feel-good life, just a nicer experience. And so I'm not sharing this to knock psychologists or people that have all this education, but I can tell you that it's not as complicated as they claim it to be.
Yeah,
it's not. And the investment you make in therapy should be for the only reason is for you to see what's available in terms of who you are. Like, none of you are broken. I don't care what you're diagnosed with. There's nothing wrong with 100% of you, because all in the way of it is thought. And again, if you got a psychologist on, they'll look at me and think I'm completely crazy, because they're seeing it from their intellect, not from where I'm pointing to, because the intellect complicates everything. Not because it's something wrong with the intellect. The intellect gets us, and I use this example. It was great. Like, when I fell in love with my beloved partner, her and I, the intellect got me to the first date, right? Mm-hmm. Got me to the restaurant, got me to the place. But something outside of my intellect, underneath the noise, got me to falling in love and to seeing how amazing it is.
That's a great example. Yeah, it's
like, a good example. As a producer, you're a brilliant producer, and you love it, and you're passionate about it. Well, yeah, your intellect got you to Sweetwater Sound or whatever it was to buy the equipment, right? But you created all this, right? You have an epiphany with a client, and you're completely present with them. The intellect got you to make the client intellect did the research to find you for your therapy or your coaching services, but the interaction and the breakthrough, whatever you want to call it, was underneath all that stuff. Like, intellect has its utility, but when it comes to well-being and seeing okay, I can't get there from here if I'm going to rely on my intellect to solve my problems. We don't solve our problems. We don't fall in love. We don't create our next act. We don't get that job we love. We don't order that we want. We don't write that masterpiece using our intellect 100% of the time. Although we think we do, quote unquote. So.
No, it's actually, I that's a great example. You're looking at saying, let intellect do intellect's job, is essentially what I'm hearing.
Exactly. It's like, it's kind of like, that's a good example. Relying completely, and I'm a big gearhead. I love cars. Some people, especially in California, people want, the electric car.
I like
burning dead things, fossil fuel. It's terrible. And ladies and gentlemen, don't judge me. I love it. I love combustions engines,
Well, this is the complicated dynamic here of your relationship with California.
Well, what do you think? California is actually run by petrochemicals and fossil fuel. The 101 freeway is a perfect example. 405. You ever see you ever looked at public transportation in California? Oh, awful. But so if today's cars are really interesting, not e-cars, they're relying on turbochargers a lot. Most cars today versus say even 12 or 13 years ago are naturally aspirated. Today's cars are relying a lot on turbocharging. A lot of people would say, well, yeah, the technology's gotten better, so you can depend on the turbochargers not to break down. But again, it's thermal breakdown happens, moving parts happens. And you can't just rely on the turbocharger for torque and for fuel efficiency. There are other components of the engine, whether it's the fuel, the fuel management system, the different computer systems on board to help regulate the amount of combustion, gasoline, compression in the engine, etc., to make the car fuel efficient and reliable. The same thing with the human experience and this spiritual experience that we are walking in. When we have understanding, we kind of see how the system works, which I've been pointing to during this conversation and last conversation. We kind of see that there is utility in the intellect, and there's far more wisdom that's inside of us outside of that. Now, it's all part of one big system. But once we see what the game the brain is playing innocently, it's like a puppy dog. Like when you get a puppy, it's like all over the place and it completely hyperactive ADHD kind of thing. It's crapping everywhere and it's just a mess, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of like what the brain does in many respects, innocently, because it just doesn't know better, and not because it wants to hurt you. It loves you, but that's what it does. That's what a brain does. And that really is liberating to know that. But more importantly, seeing that beyond the meat jacket, our physical machine, there is something much bigger that is guiding us along, who we really are, our conscious self, that if we trust it, will get us to that partner that we fall in love with, that will take over from the intellect. Right.
Well, that's some of the things, that you're saying. It's one of the reasons I like some modern leanings that a lot of maybe modern treatments and things have, is like strengths-based focus which is, essentially saying you're not broken, you're actually whole already. Let's start from that point. Also the idea, a lot of times people get there, and I'll say it that way, maybe that's a technique thing, but the ways that people get there, what you're describing also is trying to have some people call it internal dialogue, internal family systems. I may have mentioned that last time we talked, but the idea of we've got these if there's a part of me, if there's an emotion inside me, that emotion means me well, right? If there's a feeling inside me, it's trying to get me somewhere good. Doesn't mean it does, right? If it's that anxiety that's like, oh, I'm super worried, there's a good chance that some part of that feeling is meant deep down to say, well, I'm trying to protect you. This feeling's trying to protect you.
I kind of, and that's interesting. And I love what you said there, because, what works for one person doesn't work for another in many respects. But the commonality that we all share is that a negative feeling, and I'm willing to bet all my Bitcoin is 100% full of crap, 100% illusory and full of crap when it's pointing to danger, if there's no present danger.
The feeling, the present feeling, right?
100%. And the content of our thinking is completely full of baloney. when it's caught up, zoomed in to some kind of stimuli that it's trying to create meaning around, creating story around. It's because of that person is why I'm feeling this way, or why I'm this in this situation. That's what the brain does. It has to find a fall guy. But once we see the game it's playing, that family, any kind of, listen to your feelings. No, the only feeling that we can depend on is no feeling, no thought, quiet, a knowing, a feel-good feeling that doesn't feel like dopamine so much. You know what I mean? It's just a knowing. Yeah. We experience it every day. It's a calm, as Michael Neal, who's a wonderful coach who actually taught NLP before he saw like, wow, that's a whole lot of work for not a lot of progress. We don't need to, because all we have, everything that all the equipment and all the knowledge and the wisdom is all within us. We don't need to like layer the system with stuff. He always says like, it's kind of like that unusual calm. It's like that calm, cool, collected feeling, right? Like for instance, today, all of a sudden I have a chapter in my book that I was talking about people like you and me that, brilliant neurodiverse, speedy minds and, sensitive minds. And just calmly, it came to me. It wasn't through my intellect. I just started writing. If you ask Stephen King, like who kind of taps into the soap opera, that the ongoing narrative of the soap opera, he'll tell you like, yeah, I mean, I have so many of these horror stories in my head because I've taken it and it's transmuted into Pet Sematary, because he's using the crazy amygdala and the crazy reptilian, very old emergency alert system to write story, which is just great. But then to take that on and think it's real when there's no, I don't know, a dog that was buried and came back alive and is chasing after you.
Right. It's not from real life experience, but it is, right. As far as we know. But it is, but it's interesting when you use that example, because once again, I'm categorizing everything in there, like, because you had to know, like the intellect gets you to the concept of writing a book, maybe, or it gets you to the keyboard. It gets you to I gotta sit down and do this some of the time.
Exactly.
Then you're trying to go somewhere else, which, to be honest, makes even if someone could mechanically write the kind of book that you're writing, even if they got through it and actually produced it, it wouldn't be very interesting, because there wouldn't be any heart there, if I can use that term.
Well, it's interesting. And I love that because it's exactly what I'm kind of pointing to. And this is the thing is that once we really understand how the system really works, what I've been pointing to, not what we've been conditioned to believe. And I wish, again, I mentioned this during the last episode, that they never taught us this in school, because again, it's very innocent to really to like be thwarted and convinced through conditioning that it's outside in versus inside out. Like that, like our outside, like we're living in a world of outside circumstance or through our outside world, right? We're not living through our outside world. We're living in the world of thought. And once we see that we're living in that world of thought, bipolar disorder, ADHD, and all these other made up, because it is made up. Because before there was ADHD, there were just people that are having these kind of cluster, these behavioral experiences. And were they miserable? Well, if they were miserable, if they kind of got caught up in it and believed it was true, like we all do, forget sometimes. But the beauty of this understanding is that we all, is really seeing and knowing like what's really true versus what is the illusion. And what I see from myself, more importantly, as a neurodiverse person, is the more I see the illusion, the more I see, like when I'm putting the Oculus glasses on in this virtual reality simulation, right? Which is what I guess what's his name, Zuckerberg wants to do with Meta or whatever the heck it's called. It's crazy.
I saw that showed up now, Meta by Meta. I'm like, oh, we're doing that? What are we doing here?
There was a funny, just to get on the tangent.
It's got to be sinister, right? Somewhere in there.
Totally. But there was a funny, someone posted on Facebook, there was a funny, like, making fun of Meta. It was called Meth. And it's a picture. Have you seen this? It's a picture of
No.
Zuckerberg with like missing teeth.
Oh
And
no.
it's got that symbol, is it like
It's a little weird infinity looking symbol.
the
isn't it?
infinity
The meta
symbol, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it says meth instead of meta.
Meth.
Really funny. But getting back to like when we point to that feel good feeling, when we look to a feel good feeling, when we look to that our the foundation of our conscious existence is hope. That everything's been built around hope. Medicine, science, all that comes from is spirit, physics, all that. And again, I'm not trying to simplify everything. Again, there are applications for all these different things, but it gets us to a certain point, and then something else takes over, which none of us knows where it comes from. I call it, you can call it God consciousness, you can call it spirit, you can call it whatever you can call it, a ham sandwich. I don't care. That is our true nature. That is our truth. And we see it all day long. We just don't pay attention to it enough because it's not sexy. It's not, the sexy part is the soap opera and the hyperbole.
Yeah. It's interesting when I see little bits of lots of different messages I get from different people that kind of come together. That's why I'm a big proponent of what you're saying is everybody has to kind of find their way, and they have to kind of find what works best for them. But a memory is kind of triggering in my mind here as you're talking. There was actually a professor that I had in a graduate program for counseling. And it was really interesting that he would do like these role plays, and it was at the point where people were actually working with clients, and then they were reporting back. And it's probably one of those. It was like a clinic where somebody could come in for free if they agreed to have a student work on them, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting experience because then there was actually real work with people going on. And one of the things that he would bring up the most often is if he would catch anything happening like this, he would always call it out. He'd say, so you were talking and the person got emotional and then you started intellectualizing. Or then you asked them about what they thought about something. Why do you care what they thought? They were there. You were there and then you left. You were where you were trying to get and then you left is what he'd always say. And so it's like, sit there and be. And one of the questions people would ask him, like students, they'd say, oh, okay, well, let me try to do that. And so I'll sit there with the emotions and just try to talk, either talk or just feel or point out what we're feeling. And the question always came up as, well, okay, where do I go from there? And he would say, stop trying to go anywhere because you're there. That's where you're at. The healing is going to happen when this person is feeling what they're feeling. Don't shame them by trying to distract them by talking about it. Don't, even if it's accidentally, right, directing them away from the feeling. And that was always very powerful to me. Yeah.
So I love that. And I'm glad you brought that because that's exactly what, and it's a different way of languaging it. I growing up for the first, I would say 30 years of my life, I would go in and out of periods of absolute being miserable and believing the miserable. Les Miserables. Is that the
you kept trying to read it. That was the problem.
Yes, exactly. Les Miserables. It
means the miserable. I think that's what it means.
Yes, it wasn't my life wasn't that Broadway show or about the French Revolution or the French.
But you did steal a lot of bread, from what I understand.
I stole a lot of bread. I was master of the house. Okay, it's terrible. Ladies and gentlemen, please go watch it yourself. I'm doing a bad job.
Anyway, so the listeners know I edited out so much singing from this episode that just happened. Like
he hopefully will edit out a lot more. Besides the
45-minute tribute. Oh my gosh.
Exactly. So, I was unhappy. I was dissatisfied with my life. I didn't like where I lived. I was dissatisfied with my relationships. And then it kind of snowballed into something that happened to me almost 20 years ago, which is in my upcoming book called Fearless, which I don't want to give away. That was kind of like the what's the word I'm looking for? What's that called when the stars all explode?
Supernova?
Yeah, it was like that. It was like the Event Horizon,
Gotcha.
That, right? The Event Horizon. And I saw there was nothing wrong with me, apparently wrong with me, my brain just works differently. And but outside of that, like I didn't have to like take on that story when I was caught up in a low mood, or I was caught up in some kind of thinking that went sideways. Like it happens to all of us. But because my brain works extra fast and it gets caught up, and it's like, that again, it's like a hard drive that gets stuck, where there's absolutely no more band, or there's no more bandwidth. It's all filled up.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the cache will clear. I know that the buffer will clear. I know that there's going to be a system restart within minutes to an hour when I'm extraordinarily wrapped up in my thinking. That is, it feels real in the moment. When you get into arguments with your partner, or you have you get an argument with T-Mobile, or it happens a lot. American Express. Keep going.
Another couple sponsors. We're knocking
right
off the list there.
We're not knocking off. Right. Exactly. I'm predicting. I'm Nostradamus predicting what's going to happen, transpire with your podcast. All these great.
You're just trying
sponsors.
to take Nostradamus's place. Now I know what the real thing is.
Yes,
you're absolutely no. We get caught up. It's all about getting caught up, and to me, that's where I do go back to that concept of trust. Do I trust that I'll get? Like when we try to get somewhere, we're undermining the trust that we're already headed somewhere.
Exactly. And so once I really kind of saw like what was really happening, like the illusion that when I got caught up in this ongoing forced narrative that I actually am not creating, we don't have any agency over our thinking. It just happens. It just happens. It comes. It's just coming and going and coming and going. We are not our thoughts. And just knowing that we're not our thoughts, and knowing that it's like this ticker tape, this energy moving through us that has to settle, that has to find some kind of movement, and it has to find its own level, which it always does, is got me really curious about how it really works versus how I was conditioned to believe this all works. And I stopped listening to the experts. Not like there's anything wrong with them, but as Eric Hoffer, the famous poet, says, the learners inherit the earth where they learn to prepare for a world that doesn't exist. And I'm paraphrasing and probably messed that up a little bit.
Oh, say that again, though. I like that. Say it again.
Okay, it's not me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm stealing this from Eric Hoffer, who was a brilliant writer and poet in the early 20th century. The learners inherit the earth while the learned prepare for a world that doesn't exist. Oh. So I started getting really curious about my own, quote unquote, if I went to a therapist, they'd call it pathology or psychopathology or messed upness or Sam's having an interesting time right now. You have to laugh. That's part of it. That how does this make any sense? Because if what is true is that I am miserable, that I can't make it happen in my life, that I'm constantly getting into relationships that are not going anywhere, where I'm living in places that I hate, and that I'm not making enough money because it's, there's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with my choice. I can go on and on. When I stopped listening to the Chatty Cathy and stop taking it seriously, which is, doesn't take any skills. It doesn't take any treatments or modalities or techniques. You don't have to read about this on Google or Wikipedia or whatever, or whatever you go to. And then I would kind of watch myself watching it settle. Like I wasn't feeling this way all the time, right? It wasn't like an ongoing drama that the brain was cooking up 24 hours a day. It felt that way sometimes because the feelings are really extreme, and then they'd vacillate, they'd go sideways, which is not fun. It doesn't feel good. When I just saw oh my God, this is all made up. It's an illusion. It's like when I see the illusion, the Oculus glasses come off. The virtual reality simulation called thought and thinking becomes really silly. Now, obviously, I do get caught up sometimes, like everybody, and I forget that I'm in a simulation. And it's very liberating, because what it frees up is is a lot of bandwidth when it comes to things that I want to do with my life, or things I want to try, or things I want to improve upon in terms of those areas of my life that I thought were so just miserable. And that's why complicating the system with modalities and techniques and treatments only lead you back to where you were heading in the first place. And once we see that we're already enlightened, all of us, which doesn't make it that you're any better than anybody else, which is kind of like, reality, that we don't like have to like make a pilgrimage to Mecca or climb Kathmandu or wherever, go to Jerusalem or Bethlehem, wherever you need to go, or India to find that enlightenment. You don't need to like hide out in a cave and meditate for 20 years. It's already there within you. You see it every day. And it's not sexy. It's calm. It's the quiet calm. It's the thing.
I mean, frankly, it's like hiking up the Himalayas looks better on Instagram, right? I mean, that's part of what you're saying is, and there's also no inherently wrong thing about hiking up the Himalayas, but for the purpose of that's where I will discover my inner guru, you're saying, no. If you want to go up to the Himalayas, take your guru with you. They're already in there, is what I'm getting from what you're saying.
It's kind of like the feeling like when you're in your grandma's house when you're little. Remember? And my grandmother used to like let me eat Oreo cookies. I was not allowed to eat them because too much sugar, make me more hyperactive. The most delicious thing in the entire world, milk and cookies. And all of a sudden, it wasn't the milk and cookies, it was just, I got quiet and I would just sit at the table eating milk and cookies. There was nobody talking. There was utter silence. Or when I would, my niece and nephew live in a beautiful part of Westchester in New York. It's up near Chappaqua. It's gorgeous up there, and especially in the fall. And we would go apple picking, and that's glorious, in this beautiful Hudson River Valley. And we'd make a day of it. We'd go. It's so simple, apple picking. It's not like, right. We're not playing video games. We're not like going on roller coasters. Just apple picking, and just like all of a sudden we all drop in. And I just see my niece and nephew, just they're gorgeous human beings. Like, that's what I'm pointing to. Like, we see it all day long. We don't pay attention enough. And I think that's what all of us, if we need to work on anything without working too hard on it, is just to see your essential nature. Like, you're built to feel good, even if you don't have everything. I mean, how do you explain, and we've talked about this before, and I don't want to babble too long, about people in areas of the world that are, that are in conflict zones, people that are living in a constant state of a threat of bombing and all kinds of violence, still manage to laugh, their kids are still playing outside and playing soccer. They're still like trusting life, that like life's got us. We got it. But, life's a contact sport. We're going to get our knocks sometimes. And I'm quoting Sydney Banks, by the way. So
you're very good at citing people. I admire that.
Well, it's a good thing that I cite them, because then, I'm not an admitted plagiarist. I'm, I let myself off the hook, and even though Sydney Banks is dead.
Well, it means you take things in, which I'm a big fan of. So what would you say to somebody if they said, how do I start? And I know in a way it's like, how do I start? You slip into it. Because if I were to say what you're saying is specifically to go apple picking. No, not really. But your story makes me think of like, oh, wait a minute. How many little instances of that have I had? Because as soon as you were talking about that, the thing that I went to was, I remember the other day when I took my 6-year-old to the park, and she was just like, oh my gosh, the park. And it's like, oh yeah, that's right.
The kids
is cool
get it,
like kid.
Totally. But see, that's the thing. It's like kids get it. Like, have you ever seen a kid that I mean, I'm sure there are all kinds of, my niece and nephew, like they're excited about life. Like, when someone could say, well, they don't have responsibilities, have to pay bills and taxes. I hate that. It's such nonsense. Kids are so present. If you want to get a good example of what I'm pointing to, look at your younger, family members or siblings or kids or your offspring, just play. Like, you don't have to like be a kid. You can still be a grown-up adult and go for a bike ride during your lunch break, or just like, I don't know, put it on a piece of music and just enjoy it.
Reminds me of a friend of mine who he's a therapist in Baltimore, and he's actually an older gentleman as well, which makes the story even better.
Cool.
That during the pandemic, when everybody's doing just Zoom session after Zoom session after Zoom session, he talked about how he just have a little lamp on his desk and be talking to people, Zoom session, and just kind of, he just was like, oh my gosh, I gotta get up and move around. And he realized there's this little playground across the street from his office, and there was a little hill by the little playground. And so he said he would just go and he'd run up the hill, run down the hill, and like stretch out his arms and jump off the hill and run down and stuff. And it's like, and it was just this beautiful thing. It was like all of a sudden he could go on, with his day, and it didn't feel confining anymore to be in his little office. But
well, that's like what exactly that I'm talking about. And look, we all have to pay bills. We all have to do all the things that adults do, but at the same time, we don't have to take our life so serious. We don't have to take ourselves so seriously that life becomes a chore. And I'm not, we all have responsibilities. Has nothing to do with what I'm talking about. We can either turn the responsibility into something dreadful and horrible, or we can make it fun. I had a client that this is years ago, who was in recovery, and dreaded working at Starbucks part-time, and they felt like a loser because they had to drop out of school and just wasn't what they wanted to do. And they'd have to work in a supermarket, because now Starbucks is in supermarkets, which is really cool, which I love. Here they are. Some, maybe not.
Oh no, they are. Yeah.
So you can go to Starbucks, whatever coffee place you like.
Right.
Coffee Bean. And I said, okay, so you're saying is that you're creating some kind of story you don't know about. Your brain is creating, you're creating some story about Starbucks, how it's going to be, terrible, and you're not going to make enough money, and it's this, that, and the other. And I said, what if you just enjoyed it? What if you just made yourself available and got out of your own self-focus and just like had fun with it, like meet all kinds of cool people and just like be of service and just enjoy those moments. Just try that on for size without trying it. Just like enjoy that moment working at Starbucks. Like see it for what it is. Like, this is supposed to happen. Like, you don't have control over any of this. This is how it's supposed to happen. We do have some, we can make things happen, or we can allow things to happen. And again, the intellect gets us to fill out the application. Okay. But the interview, outside of the formalities of the interview, your intellect doesn't get you the job. You get the job. So long story short, my client started to enjoy like the nuances of, and the smells of the coffee. I love the smell of coffee and like the beans grinding and like, and they pour the whipped cream on the top of it's just wonderful
and stuff. Right.
He fell in love with being present. It had nothing to do with Starbucks. He fell in love with the present moment. And he ended up loving his job. Like, the days went by quickly, but we're not taught that. We're not taught to like, life's a drudgery, walking uphill in the snow. And maybe it is sometimes, but it's not that way all the time.
Yeah. Excellent. It's great to, I don't know when we'll do Sam part 3, but this part 2 has been really cool.
Yes. It's getting better every time. And I love our
47% cooler each time you're on the show. That's the thing.
47.5%.
That's what the meter. Zoom has a feature. It's the update.
Oh yeah.
It measures how cool it is. But
cool. Is that an extra? Is that an option? Do you have to pay like a membership for that?
No, that's
I
the
don't know if I'm
great
cool
thing.
enough.
Is that's the great thing is just if you're cool enough that it appears. That's how you know. That's how you know. Tell everybody a little bit again where they find you. By the way,
Yes. And again, it's an honor to be.
Address
I love you.
is
I love your
nice.
podcast, and I love what
Um,
you do. And you're a man of many talents. He's not just a therapist and a professional. He's also a producer, ladies and gentlemen, with a mic with a pink felt thing on top of it.
That's right. It's my trademark.
Very, very cool. You can find me on Instagram at Sam Led Consulting. My podcast is called The Fearless Now. My website is samledconsulting.com. Facebook is Sam Led Consulting. Pretty much Sam Led Consulting. And I'm booking sessions into next year. So we'd love to hear from you if I can be of help or not. But just the opportunity to be on your podcast is an honor, and I really appreciate it. And we're going to do part 3. You're going to come on mine.
That's right.
Like we said we were, but
Yeah.
you gotta like
Traffic.
get there first.
Right. Exactly. I got to show
You
up.
gotta get there
That's the
first. You
thing.
just gotta show up, and then let the rest do its thing. Yep.
We will
Exactly.
do it.
Do it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for listening to the Court Arts Podcast Network. To listen to more Court Arts shows, visit courtemparts.com.